To say that Roger Ebert was the premier film critic of the 20th century is akin to saying milk is the premier choice for wetting down breakfast cereal. There really aren't many other options, but why? How did this failed screenwriter from Chicago end up becoming a Pulitzer Prize-winning writer and being the most trusted voice in movies for the better part of 4 decades? Was it charisma? Was it intelligence? Was it wit? Though it's easy to see as you read or watch his reviews that all 3 of these played a role in his endearment to the American public, what I found as I reviewed this reviewer was that it was his joy in the journey that really made him great. I hit a wall early on trying to figure out how to clearly talk about Roger Ebert's long and storied career. With so much material to sift through, I quickly became overwhelmed. Since my schedule had me nearby Chicago, I thought I'd take a quick trip into his city and see if inspiration might strike. And as I walked through downtown Chicago, I realized reviewing film is not much different than being a tourist in a new city. You're keenly aware of sights, sounds, and experiences and constantly processing them for value. This constant curiosity is a large part of what made Ebert great. Ebert saw movies as a journey, that much like life was a joyful process of discovery. When he wrote about Star Wars, that it's as goofy as a children's tale, as shallow as an old Saturday afternoon cereal, and as corny as Kansas in August, and a masterpiece, you immediately got the sense that he accepted the movie on its own terms and allowed himself to explore the creative vision in the way the creator had intended it. He discovered what had been placed before him as opposed to holding against it his preconceived ideas. As I made my way through Chicago, I came upon a place called Garrett's. Now, Garrett's makes incredible flavored popcorn, and it's very distinctly Chicago, but if I had had my mind set ahead of time on where I was going, those blinders might have resulted in me missing some of the greatest caramel corn I've ever tasted. There's something intoxicating about living life with eyes open like this, in this way, and Ebert's reviews from the beginning showed he carried the same curiosity into each movie-going experience. This awareness allowed a career that dominated print, television, and even the internet, to see movies not only with his eyes, but also with his head and his heart, and to not just be a critic, but a reviewer and a friend. In 1967, Ebert was given the film critic job for the Chicago Sun-Times, and despite not having thought movies would be a large part of his life that day, it became immediately obvious he had found his home. A Pulitzer Prize 8 years later was a tangible testament to his ability for critique, analysis, and prose. Ebert's written reviews were full of insight, humor, and detail. Yet digging into those details, you never get the sense that Roger is nitpicking. When in one of his last reviews of the Red Dawn remake, he mentions that the story's time frame is murky. It's not just a negative for negative's sake. He ties it directly to how distracting it is to an audience to not know where the characters are in relation to the amount of time that has passed, and how confusing and distracting that can be. Pointing out negatives without nitpicking reminded me of a statue I saw downtown. It was a beautiful stone statue, but as I looked closely, I noticed a gum wrapper lodged in one of the crevices. I did manage to pick it out, but was it really important to my view of the statue? Was the statue any less beautiful because of it? Ebert understood that anyone can look closely until they find something they don't like, but it's more important to draw attention to the parts that affect the greater purpose. It's this keen eye for relevant detail that defined his writing career. If Ebert's time as a writer showed off his ability to in-depth critique, his introduction to television with fellow Chicago critic Gene Siskel showed he could balance it with a deft ability of summary and review. When At the Movies premiered in 1982, he immediately found a knack for finding the most interesting and relevant information about a film that could let the audience know if they might enjoy it and quickly summarize why. A gift essential in the short attention span world of video. In just a few sentences, listen to Ebert zoom in on the one thing that keeps Batman from being a great film while maintaining a broad perspective of the movie as a whole.
The film noir look of the film was very nice, but I didn't care about anything that happened in the movie. I never really found that these characters became people that I could get involved with. I felt that Nicholson, as the Joker, went on way too long. He was on too often. He was doing the same thing over and over. I found the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale didn't work at all, Kim Basinger and Michael Keaton. In fact, when she's in the Batcave and she sees for the first time that Bruce Wayne is in fact Batman, do you remember what her reaction was? She had no reaction.
I think
they left the reaction out of the film. They didn't even care that she was surprised. No.
Whether you agree with him or not, you know exactly what he's saying and why it was the linchpin to his enjoyment of the film. Add to this the absolute simplicity of the thumbs up, thumbs down rating system, and the TV show quickly became the source for movie opinion for the many years it aired. It's astounding to think how deeply entrenched Siskel and Ebert's show became in our culture. 2 thumbs up became a coveted prize for films and basically synonymous with achievement in general, much of which is due to the ability of the hosts, and Ebert in particular, to see movies broadly and assess them simply. This may seem like a basic thing, but so often it's easy in review to forget the forest for the trees, to be so entrenched in the details and minutiae that you forget to step back and enjoy the view. It's the difference of visiting Chicago and walking the streets, but never ascending Willis Tower to see the city from above. There's a beauty in the expanse of the city that you would miss. While it's true Ebert found the greatest level of notoriety on television, it was the third phase of his career, the internet, that gave him a new level of vulnerability and sway with his fans. After a battle with cancer left Ebert unable to speak, he rededicated himself to the written word, and ironically, became much more vocal without a voice than with one. His adoption of new media like Twitter made him more accessible than ever, and to many he began to feel less like a critic and more like a friend. If the critic scans with his head, and the reviewer scans with his eyes, the friend scans with their heart. A friend is more apt to lob opinions or speak off the cuff, and Ebert's final years are full of that style of discourse. In fact, it was in these later reviews that his tone became a bit more cantankerous and striking. I'd even say it's in these reviews that Ebert's main flaw as a reviewer surfaced, that being his tendency to allow his personal moral worldview to distract him from objectivity. Now, this isn't to say Ebert hadn't been accused of moralizing in his reviews before his twilight, or that morality isn't a valuable part of discourse. But occasionally, a movie would tweak his morals in a way that he could not objectively offer thoughts on its quality or content. For example, he famously refused to even rate The Human Centipede on the star system because, as he said, it exists where the stars don't shine. Though it's a sentiment many, including myself, are likely to share, at this point Ebert ceases to be a critic or a reviewer and instead becomes a prophet or preacher. This distraction of periphery opinionation also landed him in cultural debates on politics, popular cultural figures, and whether or not video games could ever be considered art. Ebert was sure they could not. He was also strangely dismissive of 3D technology as an artistic tool when, for so long, he had been an advocate of directors using all sorts of tools, tweeting things like, 3D is an annoying distraction, diminishing a film's emotional appeal by introducing cognitive dissonance. And the Christopher Nolan quote, "I never meet anybody who actually likes 3D." Tweets like these seem to stand in direct opposition to his thoughts on other technology, for instance, using black and white film. He says, many moviegoers and video viewers say they do not like black and white film. In my opinion, they are cutting themselves off from much of the mystery and beauty of the movies. And also, black and white is an artistic choice. To exclude black and white from your choices is an admission that you have a closed mind, a limited imagination, or are lacking in taste. Now substitute 3D for black and white, and the inconsistency seems clear. Now, does this inconsistency or his occasional moralizing mean Ebert was not a great critic and reviewer? Not by a long shot. It was never something that defined his career, but it is worth mentioning as we step back and take a look at the overall picture. The opposing side to the perceived negatives of his Twitter accessibility is also that Ebert became even more lovable, even offering at one point his tweeted review of an internet staple. In the end, Ebert succeeds because more than anything, he is an observer, willing to take the journey on which he is led while never closing his eyes. He allows himself the freedom to explore closely without being distracted by over-analysis, and yet doesn't forget to step back and take in the beauty of the expanse. His reviews are a reminder to embrace curiosity, observation, critical thinking, and the joy of discovery, challenging us to strike that difficult balance of being both a critic and a reviewer of everything around us while never forgetting to truly stop and enjoy the review.